All right, so our area of focus, this is a CDCN talk. I'll make it about 15 minutes long, and then we'll be able to break for lunch. When we first decided to start working on the CDCN, Dr. Van Ree, Dr. Rubenstein, my mentor, and I spent a lot of time talking about what do we want to make this? What does the CDCN need to be? And we looked at a lot of other rare disease organizations and found that rare disease organizations typically fund research by raising money and then letting researchers apply to use it however those researchers want to use it, which is basically the idea is that you raise money and then you hope that the right researcher applies to do the right study at the right time and that researcher has the right skill set to do it. So there's a lot of hoping and you need a lot of the right things to line up. And unfortunately, that process works well if there's like hundreds of researchers applying for funding, but it doesn't work so well if there's like a handful of researchers, because then you're just kind of leaving it to chance that the right person will apply at the right time for the right study. So we decided we want to take a different approach, and that approach was to find all the people worldwide, physicians, researchers, that had any ideas about what we should do for Castleman disease. And then we got all of their ideas. We sent out a bunch of surveys to find out what are their ideas for what research should be done. And then once we had their ideas, we went through and prioritized all these ideas to say, well, what should be done first? What should be done second? We prioritized all the ideas, and then we went out and found the best person in the world to do each of those studies. So we went to Columbia University to Ian Lipkin, who's the world's expert on something called pathogen hunting. We went to Minji Byam in WashU in St. Louis, one of the top centers in the world for genetic sequencing. So basically the idea is that we let the community prioritize what should be done, and then we go out and find the best person in the world to actually do it. Trying to get rid of the uncertainty and the chance of just kind of hoping that the right person applies to do the right study. And of course, once we prioritize what study we're going to do, as you've seen and as you've heard, then the next step is, okay, we're doing this study, so we need this many samples and we need this much money to do it. And so today is all about that. We're getting the samples from you guys, and tonight we're going to be raising the money for specific studies. And then something that we always try to do with the CDCN is think about how do our research findings translate into helping patients right away? What drugs could help patients right away? And then our registry is going to be used to try to get data on what's working and what's not working. This registry, think about this. All of us have thousands of pages of medical records. We're going to bring together thousands of pages of medical records on hundreds and maybe even thousands of patients, which is going to help us to understand this disease in a way that we've never thought about it before. And I mentioned the supportive resources. Patty is an incredible resource, and hopefully you guys take advantage of being able to find out from her who the best doctors are to go see. The CDCN, we're called the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network for a reason. It's all about collaboration. It's all about bringing together everyone to try to figure this thing out, and this is what we've been focused on. This is a listing of our doctors that are part of the CDCN network. As you can see all over the world, every continent except Antarctica is represented with Castleman's doctors. So the CDCN today, I mentioned before that back in 2012, this is really a vision. It was something that Dr. Van Ree and I spoke about for a while, something I went to my mentor, Arthur Rubenstein, to talk to him about for a while. And obviously all three of us are still very involved today. We still have an incredible board of directors with Michael and with Greg leading us. That oversees all of our work. We now have this really amazing scientific advisory board. We've got 28 doctors from 8 different countries represented on the scientific advisory board. 5 continents are represented on that board. And then we have an advisory council we've recently started to work on. Mary's been helping to lead that, of business leaders in the Philadelphia area to help us to come up with new ideas to how to raise more awareness and raise more funds for research. And then we've got the heart and soul of the CDCN is a group of just brilliant scientists from all over the world, particularly based here in Philadelphia, but folks like Jason, who just came in, who's up at the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard, who leads our group, Amy, Sheila, Helen, we've got just this awesome group of folks that are trying to figure out what is Castleman disease, answer those questions. What's starting this whole thing? How do we stop it? So we've got a great research team. But the research isn't possible without fundraising. Mary leads the fundraising team. And of course, fundraising and awareness go hand in hand. The more awareness you raise, the more funds you can raise. And then we think about community engagement as kind of tying it all together. That's Patty's group, where she tries to help get you to the right doctors, where we try to connect with physicians and researchers about the disease. And when you look at this group, I'm so proud. This group is made up of volunteers. These are people who, Jason is a research scientist at MIT and Harvard. He has a million other things he could be working on. He has research that he could be working on, but he dedicates his time to this, to trying to figure out this disease, to trying to push forward science to help each of us. And obviously I have a very personal interest. I have this disease, and I care about a lot of people who have this disease, but these are people who don't have the disease. And yes, they care about people that have the disease, but it's just amazing to me the amount of time and energy that all have been put in. And then I also have two awesome people that help me out. Helen and also Wes are really important members of our team. And of course, we have this really huge network of physicians and patients all working together. So in 2012, we had a lot of hurdles. Folks weren't collaborating, we didn't understand the disease well, no diagnostic criteria. I shared a lot of this with you before. Now we've got a huge network. We've got a bunch of studies that are in process. Last year we invested about 10 times as much funding into research as we did in 2012. We established a diagnostic criteria. We now have our own ICD-10 code, and actually this is really exciting because we didn't used to have a code. So anytime you went to a doctor and they had to say what type of disease you had, you would get 785.6. 785.6 code is for anyone with enlarged lymph nodes. So the problem with that code of enlarged lymph nodes, there's a lot of reasons you might have enlarged lymph nodes. So insurance companies would fight back and say, well, why are they getting all these treatments? A lot of times patients wouldn't get coverage for the drugs they needed because of this code. And on top of that, from a research perspective, we couldn't find Castleman's patients because when we looked at the code, we found everyone who's had any sort of illness and never had a big lymph node, and so we could never find the Castleman's patients within it. So Dr. Van Ree and I spent a lot of time back in 2014 proposing a code, submitting a code, and in October, the code went live, and I was really happy that it was going to go live, and then it wasn't until last weekend I was looking at one of my own clinical notes when I went to see my doctor, and it said Z51.2 or something, where it usually says 785.6, and I was like, wait a minute. And then I looked at this, and it's our own code. We, Castleman Disease, have our own code, which is, I'm so excited about. I emailed everyone that day. I was like, we got a code. But it's great, because from a patient care perspective, this is gonna help with insurance companies tremendously, because they're gonna see this code, and they're say, oh, it's Castleman disease. We need to pay for this, because this drug is gonna help Castleman disease. It's not just gonna help an enlarged lymph node.
What is the code number?
I'll have to tell it to you. I'll have to look it up. It's in an email I sent to a bunch of people. There's a Z in it. But I can't, that's not gonna help get you too far. There's a Z in it. Yeah, it's gonna help with getting drugs from insurance, and it's also really gonna help from a research perspective, because we can get big data sets of everyone with that code, and it's gonna really help.
I'm sorry, so most insurances know about that, or no?
Yeah, so every insurance company, every hospital is gonna have to use the correct code.
Okay.
I mean, I imagine there's probably gonna be some incorrect coding for a little bit of time.
Yeah,
But
because we tried billing it or saying something about it, we can't do it, and they will approve it.
yes.
So it's prior authorization, however that is, and then that's.
That should be eliminated with this new code. It should, because that code is now tied to Castleman, so any drug using Castleman's, this should really speed things up.
Okay.
So we're really happy about that.
Yay.
And then, of course, siltuximab got approved in 2014. Siltuximab is the only FDA-approved drug for HHV-negative MCD. It is a total game changer and lifesaver for many of us. At the same time, it doesn't work for everyone. It works really, really well for between about a third and almost a half of patients. But unfortunately, it doesn't work for all of us. But we are very fortunate as a community to have an approved drug, because there's 7,000 rare disorders and only 5% have an FDA-approved drug. We happen to fall into that 5%. So we're fortunate to have an approved drug. We also, I should have mentioned this when I started talking earlier today, we're also very fortunate to have the drug company that makes that drug be really supportive of the CDCN. Janssen Pharmaceuticals actually sponsored this summit today. They have been incredibly supportive of the work that we're doing. In fact, in ways that most pharmaceutical companies wouldn't even consider supporting, they have just gone above and beyond. So that's a huge step for the community. As I shared before, we have a new disease model guiding all of our research. And we have the horsepower and the strength and the expertise of care that has been around since 2007 under leadership of Greg and his wife, Sherilyn, helping us to continue to grow and reach more and more people. So I'm going to highlight some of these tonight during my talk, so I'm going to go through them really quickly now. But 2016 has been a year of really unprecedented progress. We got data back. I don't think I've even told Greg and Michael. We got data back on our Hunt study where we found that there was no virus or pathogen in the unicentric Castleman's patients or the HHV8 negative MCD patients. Basically, before we talked about the firefighters turning on to fight a fire, well, we now know that there is not a virus, at least based on the best technology available and the best hands available. We know that there is not a virus in those two subtypes. And it took a lot of work to do that study. We had to get 34 samples from 7 sites around the world, 2 of them in Japan. Almost half the samples came from Norway. It was the most incredibly difficult study to get off the ground, but we did it, and after 2 years, we got back this really important answer. And so basically, this is our model for how we think about the disease. There's 4 things that we think could be causing Castleman's, and basically this study essentially does that. It wipes off one of our 4 theories, which is, for me, I would have rathered us answered and know exactly what Castleman's is. Though we don't know what it is, now we can wipe off one of the things that we know it isn't. And so that still helps us get closer to figuring this thing out. So now we're honed in on, is there something genetic that we're born with? That's one hypothesis. Something genetic that makes our immune system abnormal. Is there something genetic that we acquire over the course of our life, which basically is like cancer? Is there a mutation that we acquire in our genes? And then the last hypothesis is Castleman's like an autoimmune disease where there are antibodies targeted against our own bodies? And so these are the 3 things, and it's great to be able to focus in. Like I said, I would have liked the answer, but at least we can now hone in on what we need to focus on. I mentioned we also sequenced 15 genomes this year. We got data back on 1 of them. The next 14 are currently being analyzed in St. Louis. But even just from that first one, we identified a mutation that we feel like is interesting. And we're in the middle of doing a bunch of validation work right now. The next update is that from a few patients, including Gary and others, giving samples while they're in the middle of flares, we found that this one type of immune cell called the T cell is really activated and is doing a lot of bad things. And so we're starting to hone in and think that maybe that could be the bad firefighter. You know, the question before, which firefighters is causing all the problems? So we're getting interested in that. Obviously, we need a lot more data before we feel comfortable saying that this is it. But we're interested and excited about that. Thanks to fundraising from last year's event that we're putting a Quest for a Cure and also Janssen funding, we launched a huge study of over 350 samples, which Jason will speak about more this afternoon. And then we've talked about the registry and the biobank. So as far as funding investment within a year, here's where we were in 2012 and then 2015. And then here in 2016, if you add up our biobank, Hunt2, our 3 FAST studies, our whole genome sequencing study, and then the SPEED2 study, we're over $600,000 in research funding, which, as you can see, is just a huge, huge bump over the last few years. And this is how we're going to figure out Castleman disease, because this isn't $600,000 to like a researcher who has a good idea. This is $600,000 towards the studies that the entire community said this is where it needs to be spent, and then we found the right person to go do it. This is really, really, really exciting, and the research from these studies are going to help totally change the way we think about the disease. And we're making our mark on medical research. So we published the largest number of HHV8 negative MCD cases in a journal called The Lancet Hematology. We described the CDCN approach also in that same journal, Lancet Hematology. We described a new subtype Tafro syndrome, which we spoke about briefly earlier in the American Journal of Hematology, the largest series on that. And we just submitted the diagnostic criteria for idiopathic MCD to the journal Blood, which is, again, what we mentioned earlier, will be a real game changer. It'll mean that doctors throughout the community will have a checklist. So we're hoping that that'll get it published, and then doctors will have something to go through. I'm going to skip through this because you guys are going to hear about it tonight, but those were our goals going into 2016, and those are what we've achieved so far. And of course, I've talked a lot about research, but it's important for us to highlight just the importance of patient engagement and what each of you guys do, both to contribute samples, to support one another, and also to motivate and inspire our research team. This isn't like an academic exercise that we're doing for fun. This is about trying to save lives, and so you guys inspire us. And these are three particularly inspiring people. There's Katie, who I mentioned earlier, one of our youngest. Raj, a medical student who's actually now a physician in Houston. And then this is Greg, our board chair and our leader, who's been fighting this thing for about 9 years now. 2003. Since 2003, so long. Wow, so 13 years, amazing. And leading us along the way. And then this is from last year's summit. We need to make sure to do a photo this year with everyone. Now, though we've made incredible progress, we are constantly reminded of the work ahead. Stacy obviously recognizes this photo of our warrior, Gary, who, this is the patient I mentioned earlier, Gary, who you saw sitting next to Stacy earlier, when he was in the intensive care unit going through a really tough time. And this experience, seeing him and seeing what he's going through, just broke all of our hearts and got us even more focused on what more can we do to take this disease down. And then right around the same time, or I guess right after that, but a few weeks ago, our youngest patient, Katie, who I mentioned earlier, though her disease is currently controlled right now with chemotherapy, the chemotherapy has weakened her immune system so much that she's at risk of a lot of infections. And she was hospitalized just a few weeks ago with an infection because of her immune system. So despite the fact that she's doing fine on treatment, we've got to figure out better solutions for Katie so that she's not at risk of these hospitalizations and infections. So like I said, we're excited about our progress, but we've got work ahead of us, and we're constantly reminded that we've got more work to do. There's two patients I wanted to highlight here today. I'm also going to mention them tonight at the gala, but I did want to share them, share photos of both of them and who they are, because again, they really touched all of us with the CDCN. This picture of Miles Prince, Mr. Prince, here in Philadelphia. He was hospitalized just down the street at Thomas Jefferson University, a great hospital here in Philadelphia. And you know, we like to think here in Philly that there's a lot of people who know a lot about Castleman disease. There's a lot of Castleman's research going on. And even still, we didn't hear about him from his daughter until a day before he passed away, just a few months ago, battling MCD. And then right around that same time, on the other side of the world, in Taiwan, Wu Pong's sister-in-law contacted us just a couple of days before he passed away, battling this disease. And I know none of us at all want to think about this side of the disease. We want to stay positive. But at the same time, I think it's really important to remember these people and to honor them by continuing to fight and push things forward. We're constantly motivated and inspired by the entire Driscoll family. We talked earlier about losing sweet angel Elise to Castleman disease about 2.5 years ago. And these people have to be remembered. We have to continue to think about them, and we need to keep their spirit alive, not just in the way that we live, but in what we do to honor them. This is Elise, who I talked about. So I want to close by sharing a much more lighthearted tone, which of course I feel like very difficult to do after what I just talked about. But I want to close in a bit lighthearted way before we go to lunch. We take a little break. You guys might remember this as our unofficial logo that we had for the first few years is the CDCN. This is a Castleman. And does anyone remember when this was our unofficial logo for a little while? I don't know if you guys remember this. But we held a webinar. Greg was on it. Jim Johnson was on it. And we showed it to a bunch of you guys. And I got resounding feedback that he was way too puny and that this was not a good Castleman, that we needed a better Castleman. This is the best I could do. I found it on Google Image, so I thought I did pretty good. But I was told we needed a new Castleman. So we got a new Castleman, which is this Castleman. And many of you guys, do you know David Underwood? Anyone recognize his name? He's really active on Facebook. He's a supporter to many people in the community. So David was on that webinar, and then David posted this 2 weeks later on Facebook. And this is him getting the warrior tattooed on his shoulder. And there's several people, even, of course, one in this room that's got the warrior tattooed on him. And I just think this is so cool, and it's so special that David and so many of us, we've all been waiting for something to get behind, and I think this shows that we're really all behind Castleman's. So we're going to take a break now for about 25, 30 minutes, and then Jason will go through his research update. Thanks, guys.